Welcome to the Libertarian Party of Indiana podcast. Joining me today is Jon Easter of the Indy Democrat blog and Paul Ogden of Ogden on Politics.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining me, guys.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good to be here.
And before we start, give out your URL so people can go check out your blogs while they're listening to this.
Well, I'm on Blogspot, so my URL is Indy Democrat, INDY, democrat.blogspot.com.
And unlike Jon Easter, I paid the extra $10 to get rid of the blog spot. So www.ogdenonpolitics.com.
And you guys have been long-established bloggers here in town.
Since the 50s, I think.
50s, since the 1950s. You used to write on newspapers, which for you kids out there is a blog on paper. Well,
no, my blog I started in 2008, so I've been doing it now for 4 years.
I'm not 100% sure. Mine was like 2000. I think it was 2008 too.
Yeah. So, and I wanted to talk to these guys from a Republican and a Democratic perspective and hear different opinions on libertarians. We obviously on the podcast talk to a lot of libertarians, and I wanted to get some feedback for the edification of libertarians to see what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong, and in the eyes of the other parties. Both of these guys are fairly independent guys. They'll, I imagine occasionally an L vote will slip in, probably less frequently an R vote. They are involved in their parties.
For me,
but,
Yeah, I was going to say.
Paul.
yeah. So they're independent guys. They're not, I wouldn't call them party hacks, and they're usually very fair towards libertarians. So let's start with Jon. Jon, what is your view on the Libertarian Party of Indiana and the political structure that we have?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this because I do think that Democrats and Libertarians, as well as Republicans and Libertarians, I mean, from different sides of the aisle, we all have a lot of things in common. I think with Democrats, a lot of the social issues that we talk about, we tend to have in common. So I think that, from that perspective, I respect a lot of what your candidates and what your party talks about from a social standpoint because, I think that you guys really bring up, I think, what you've seen your gubernatorial candidate Rupert Boneham bring up in some of the debates. Those are core issues for libertarians, ex-convict reentry programs, things like that. These are things that the two parties don't talk about a lot, and it's good to have that third voice. And I think that's what the Libertarian Party provides is. And I think your vice presidential candidate, who I got to meet this morning, Jim Gray, said it, that you kind of bring you're the political mainstream, and it's kind of. In a way, it's sad that people don't see it that way. Mm-hmm. That you are kind of in the middle. You are the party that bridges the gap, and I'm a Democrat, but certainly I see, where your party's kind of in the mainstream in that regard.
Yeah, I agree with Jon. I think the Libertarians bring an important voice to the table. The fact is they're raising issues a lot of times that I wish my Republican Party would raise. Things like liberty issues, things like civil forfeiture, which I'm very concerned about, things like TSA agents going overboard in terms of searching people at airports. The candidates like Ron Paul, candidates like Johnson, the candidate, what's his first name? Johnson. Gary Johnson. Gary Johnson.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Had a brain froze for a second. They bring issues to the table about liberty that I want the Republican Party addressing that they often don't address.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the things that you've seen from candidates here locally that you've liked? Things that I know you both, on occasion on your blogs, have complimented libertarians and certain candidates for doing some of the things. What are some of the things that we as a party, especially here in Indianapolis, where you guys pay most attention, what are some of the things we're doing right? Let's start with Paul Ogden.
Some of the things you're doing right, I think, is you get into the issues a lot better than the parties do. I don't know, but I can't speak for John's Democratic Party, but you go around to Republican meetings, and when I first started, you would think that they would talk a lot about issues, but in fact they don't. It's like, well, we have the jerseys with the R on it. We support our people, our team, and I'm sure John has it on the other side. In terms of supporting Democrats, but they don't talk about issues. And one thing I love about the Libertarians is they talk about issues. I don't always agree with them, but they're about issues, and in particular, limited government, the Constitution, which I wish the Republicans would pay a lot more attention to.
Well, I think that Paul hit on something very key. When you do go to Democrat meetings, and we don't have to meet in basements or anything. But when we do go to those meetings, you do get a lot of the rah-rah, the red beat kind of thrown around. What I like about being a Democrat is that in my party there is a place for Joe Donnelly as well as Andre Carson. And they are on the total different ends of being a Democrat. Okay,
right.
They're on the totally different endpoints of doing that. What I like from Libertarians, what I see from you guys is kind of a clear focus. If you ask Joe Donnelly about gay marriage, he's going to give you, well, I supported this act. I supported this act. I did this. I did that. Well, what do you agree? Well, no, I just can't get there. That was what we talked about. And I appreciate that, once I questioned him more, he said he was open to civil unions and things like that. But for me, an issue that's important to me is equality. And, Rupert, you take his perspective, which is not the perspective of the other two gubernatorial candidates, by the way.
Right.
You take Rupert's perspective. He has been clear in saying that I support equality. It doesn't threaten my marriage. This is what I will do when I'm governor. And I like that clarity.
He's the first candidate in Indiana to run for governor to say that. I mean, to be clear about it, even Democrats of the past have not said it. And, our view is that while, okay, it may not be the widespread view of most Hoosiers at this moment, it's a civil rights issue. And most Libertarians don't want permission from the government to get married in the first place. Marriage licenses were created to keep couples from, interracial couples from getting married 100 years ago. I mean...
And that's... And I agree with the I don't have a problem with same-sex marriage. The politics is going that direction. The political polls are showing an incredible increase in support for that. Where I differ with the Libertarians is when they say, well, wait a second, I don't want marriage sanctioned by the state. I understand the motivation. I understand the philosophy. The reality is that it's going to be sanctioned by the state. Sanctioned by all 50 states is not going to go away anytime soon. I want people who are not heterosexual or homosexual to be able to marry someone of the same gender. I don't have a problem with that, and it is a civil rights issue to me. But the idea that the state somehow is not going to be involved in, I don't think that's realistic.
So it sounds like you both probably I'm motivated to vote for Libertarian candidates because I'm a Libertarian and I'm more attracted to a broad philosophy. But it sounds like you guys are more issue-focused. So if a Libertarian candidate speaks to you on a certain issue, you'll support that candidate with your vote or maybe even go a step further and promote those candidates. I mean, is that the case? Or what will get you to vote as a Democrat or a Republican for a Libertarian?
Well, I can speak to a situation a few years back when a gentleman by the name of Bob Kern was running for the 5th District as a Democrat, and it was a situation where Dan Burton was the Republican. Looking at those two candidates, I could not, in good conscience, support either. Nothing against Bob Kern. He's emailed me a few times, some things for the blog. And
I'm guessing Paul.
his
He's emailed you.
Yes, he has.
He calls me, everyone.
He calls me occasionally.
But I could not support either one of those candidates. Just couldn't support Dan Burton, and I don't believe in ever throwing your vote away. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is you're never throwing your vote away if you vote. Period. So let's just in that discussion right there. But what I did was I voted for the Libertarian in that case, which was Joe Hauptman.
Right.
I voted for him, and I have voted for other Libertarians as well. I did consider Rupert this time around. I did not end up voting for Rupert. I did early vote, but I was an undecided voter on that issue. And you talk about those single issues. Well, I think if they're important enough that they can really weigh how much you put into making the decision for your vote. But in the end, what did it for me? I heard John Gregg's performance in the debate where he talked about families and how families don't always look like the traditional two-parent family, and that resonated with me enough that I could say I can vote for John. And I think John also made some mistakes early on with just responding to questions, and he
Sure.
didn't understand the full situation anymore. But Rupert is a tremendous candidate, and I think that you guys should be commended. I don't know if you'll get to this later, but you guys have really put forth some good candidates as well, which brings legitimacy to your organization when you put forth some really good people.
Yeah.
Especially in statewide races.
Yeah, and we take hits all the time. I mean, my existence as the executive director of this party is to wake up daily and justify my existence. And it makes it easier when you run guys like Andy and Rupert. I hear all the time, you guys should just run 4 state house races and throw all the resources into those 4 state house races or township advisory boards. Well, I couldn't imagine walking up in front of my convention as the executive director and saying, I got a strategy. We're not going to run a Senate and a gubernatorial candidate this year. And my view is recruit candidates for every office and find the best ones you can. And Rupert this year especially has been a tremendous asset for the Libertarian Party because, people come up to meet him and get an autograph and say hi because they know him from Survivor and from Rupert's Kids, and they stand in line for 20 minutes, and that gives me 20 minutes to canvass them. Yeah. When you're knocking on doors, you don't get 20 minutes. You get maybe 30 if they answer the door, and I've got 20 minutes to talk to them about the LP, give them the quiz, hand them materials for our other candidates, and I think people are going to be extremely surprised by Rupert's results, especially because he visits these small towns that politicians haven't been to in years.
Well, and I think Chard Reed, too.
Chard Reed, absolutely.
In the 5th District has done a great job. I mean, Scott Reski is somebody who's been nebulous on some of his, and I'm not bashing on candidates. I'm just saying from a political commentator's point of view, Chard Reed's been a very legitimate candidate in that race where, Susan Brooks and Scott Reski, that's where you have 3 good choices, really. I mean, Susan Brooks has her experience, you have Scott Reski, and then you have Chard. So I'm glad I don't live in that district. Certainly. I live in Andre Carson's district where I have a question excellent choice for office every year.
And I'm guessing it's not Carlos, is it?
Carlos is a good man. Carlos is a good man, but no, he's not ready to be in Congress.
Every 7th District listener to the podcast, their head just exploded, John.
I'm just impressed by the quality of candidates that the Libertarian Party can continually attract. It's just very impressive. And the energy and the ideas, and I know the Republican Party would be a lot better if we had people who were as energetic and as devoted as the Libertarians are to their philosophy and their party.
Right. We hear the wasted vote thing, and if you join one of the 2 parties, you could actually make a difference and all that. And I mean, I fundamentally believe that America is ready and desperately needs a third option. And I think, like you both have said, when I don't want to vote for even my team, it's nice to have an option that I can agree with on maybe 40 to 60% of the stuff, of these ideas. Would either of you say, yes, we need a third party in this country, or come on home, come to our side and work from within our party?
Well, I think I've written about this before. The fundamental problem is not attracting quality candidates. The Libertarians do that. They have great volunteers. The trouble is the average person out there just sees two parties. And how do you get them to change that mindset? I don't know. We've had periods in our history where we've had third parties, but it's been a long time since we've had a successful third party. I would love to see libertarians in the Republican Party because I'd like to see the Republican Party more libertarian. But I don't begrudge the libertarians from having their own party and running their own candidates because, frankly, if the Republicans aren't paying attention to libertarian issues, that is your right. And certainly wouldn't discourage people from voting libertarian or running as libertarians.
I would agree with Paul on to a certain degree there with that response. I think that I bumped the microphone.
Don't you teach broadcasting?
I
what are you doing
exactly,
over there?
Right. I think that when you look at this whole idea of a wasted vote, and I said it earlier, if you're voting, it's never a wasted vote because you don't. At least I never leave a spot blank on the ballot. Never do I leave a spot blank. Now I did this time because there are 20 judges running. There are only 20 judges on the ballot, so they're all getting elected. So I voted for 10, and I know all 10, and I voted for 10, but I didn't vote for the other 10. But I never leave a spot on the ballot blank. So I look at everything, and I know some people will go in, they'll just vote for president, and they'll put it through the hopper, and it goes. But I just don't think that if you don't know the issues, and I think you go down to the most local form of government. While we've been having this debate about what's going on in Washington, the city county council here in Indianapolis has been debating things that are going to affect this city for years. Budget decisions, things like that. You ask anybody on the street, parking meters, TIF districts. Yeah. You ask people on the street, they'll tell you, oh, I don't like Obama, or oh, I don't like Romney, or oh, I love Gary Johnson, or they'll tell you these things.
Isn't it funny how everybody likes the Libertarian candidate, nobody doesn't like him?
Well, I'm speaking to Libertarians.
I know.
But they won't be able to tell you what a TIF district is.
Right.
And they won't be able to tell you, what the issue is between Mayor Ballard and the council Democrats right now. Or why it's a big deal that, a body that's elected to represent the people, the city county council, can't get things past one guy, the mayor. And so these are the broader issues that I think as three parties we can address because Paul said it very well. If Republicans are libertarian, or there were more libertarians that were Republicans, maybe it would make the party turn its head away from this, Tea Party destruction that we've seen, or on the other side of things, maybe we wouldn't be so far left anymore in the Democratic Party if we looked more towards things like getting rid of the Patriot Act or what's going on with the TSA, maybe those things. But I still believe that all politics is local because it is. So I always challenge people to look at those local races and decide who you're going to vote for. And I think it was great that you guys had a full at-large slate this past year, led by Bill Levin, who I met and is just a really cool cat.
Yeah. And I mean, my view is that, yes, both parties need to be pulled in certain libertarian directions, but you better accomplish that, especially in a city like Indianapolis where everybody knows each other and everybody, it's hard to not know everybody who's involved in politics in most of the parties. So you can have dialogues, and when you run candidates, you can speak out on issues, and you get to speak out on issues not just to the primary, but all the way to the general election. And you see issues like vocational education, which is something that Rupert has been talking about for 20 years, and specifically in his campaign from the second it launched. Well, it got poll tested, and then one of the candidates took that and made it an advertisement for their campaign and has sort of taken that on and championed it. So I look at the dragging of the other parties to a libertarian direction. I think it's more functional when you have a third party. I feel this year, I mean, it's a feeling and a belief that there has been more buzz about libertarians. There's been more conversation, more media. do you guys sense that? Is that sort of a libertarian just being in a libertarian echo chamber, or do you hear more about libertarians this year than maybe in 2 years ago or 4 years ago? Let's start with Paul.
Oh, I think we're hearing more about libertarians this year. And I think part of it has to do with the quality of candidates that you put forward, and the Andy Horning, great candidates, run several times, has a lot of name recognition, which I think is going to give him a fairly strong performance on Election Day. Then, of course, you have Rupert, who's turned out to be a dynamite candidate with a lot of ideas and tons of energy. And I think that's really helped. So the question is, how do you change the patterns of behavior of people looking at elections as just being Republican versus Democrat? That's where you need to start. The Libertarian Party needs to start making progress. And I think a lot of it has to do with the advertisements getting out there, having yard signs. I know there's some debate about the philosophy on that. I'm a big believer that you need to start at the local level, the grassroots level, to tell people, hey, there's this third party.
Right.
Yard signs work when they're in yards.
Yeah.
Not when they're in right-of-ways.
Yeah, and yard signs are to make volunteers and people in that party and voters feel better and promote it to their neighbors.
I will not put a candidate in my yard that I don't agree with.
Right.
Because it's my yard. And I currently have, I think, five yard signs in my yard, but the other ones, I may have other candidates I agree with. I just couldn't find their yard sign. But this whole idea, are we hearing more about libertarians this year? I think that we are. I think that Gary Johnson is a tremendous candidate for president. The Republicans, and I talk, and I'm not saying this just being a Democrat, but I think the Republicans really missed out on a very good candidate. They could have had Gary Johnson. They treated him like he was, chop liver and just threw him out. That's not what we should be doing as a political organization. If I'm the Republicans, I'm thinking that.
And that's why
I think the Republicans sometimes, and Paul can disagree with me, I think the Republicans kind of eat their young more often than the Democrats do. In the Democratic Party, certainly we gripe and complain sometimes about Evan Bayh, but sometimes we gripe and complain about Joe Donnelly, but we still consider them Democrats. Those kind of things don't happen. I think Jim Gray talked about it this morning, how the Republican Party left him, and I think that there are a lot of people that are out there. Richard Lugar now, the Republican. I know you would argue that Richard Lugar left the Republican Party, but I think that a lot of folks, have this idea that their party left them, so there's no place for them to go, and I think that's why you have the Libertarians maybe that are being talked about more, because you do have good candidates.
Right, and Rupert's a former Democrat. And Andy, I think, was just a libertarian always. I mean, so there's...
I think he ran as a Republican.
He ran, but...
he ran as a Republican.
I like what he says about that, too. That's very... I saw the inside of the animal, and
And you guys my assessment of the other two parties is that Democrats are a coalition party where you have special interest groups who come together to elect like-minded candidates. Herding cats, and you're going to get people like John Gregg who is not viewed favorably by the LGBT community and by a lot of progressives in Indianapolis, but they love Andre Carson, but ultimately...
But Andre Carson wouldn't be maybe viewed as well in Sanborn.
Right. And Republicans, though, are a little more monolithic. They're a little more get in line or you're out. And when you're out, you're out. And
I don't... And no offense, I'm not... I don't think that's accurate. It's locally, first of all. If you want locally, there is no philosophy. There is no conservative philosophy. I think we've seen that from Mayor Ballard, who's the most liberal mayor I've ever seen.
But if you want to be part of the Republican establishment, if you want to be a decision maker, if you want to be a candidate that has a rising star, I think it's very difficult to be a Republican and not buy into Republican doctrine, which whatever that is, because you're right, it's sort of part Rush Limbaugh, part
you're talking
Democrat.
You're talking more national as opposed to the.
I'd say even locally. I mean, you, Paul, have been the victim of you said something mean about one of the other Republicans, so we're going to call you names and kick you out.
I'm a conservative. They don't kick me out because because I'm outspoken. I
Right.
speak the truth, and a lot of people don't want to hear that.
I'm sure that John says mean things about Democrats sometimes, but not in a mean way. Not in
But I was just talking about this. I've been very critical of Dan Parker
right.
on my blog.
He's a state chairman.
He's the state chairman, but I've been very critical of Dan. He's always cordial to me, and I don't know if when I turn my back, if he's making faces, but he is always he's always very cordial to me, and I know he reads my blog because one time I threw him in as a gubernatorial candidate, and he actually sent me an email. I am not running for governor. I am not doing it. So, I think that from that standpoint, I don't think there is kind of the animosity at a state or a federal level as much. I think you can be a Democrat and you can say, these are my views. And I think that goes a lot better than it says, I'm a Republican, here are my views. I mean, look at what's happened with Mitt Romney. Even now, when he was governor of Massachusetts, he had one set of views. When he's running for president, he has one set of views. Now, today he has one set of views. Tomorrow he may not have the same set. But he's evolving into,
yes.
He moved to the right for the primary, and now he's moved back to the center. And
he's evolving from a snake into a worm.
There is some of that happens on the Democratic side as well. Barack Obama moved way to the left when he was, I don't even know if he moved way to the left when he ran against Hillary Clinton. Hillary's certainly not maybe the farthest left of any Democrat ever in the history, but there was a left movement, and then he's moved back towards the center.
He went from extremely left to really left.
Yeah. Well, some people say that, but I would argue that he isn't extremely left. That's why you had some of the radicals on the far left that were very upset with him because he wasn't left enough. Well, every party has its radicals.
But John, you're not going to see a pro-life Democratic speaker at the national convention get up and talk about abortion and their feelings on that.
Bart Stupak learned that the hard way.
True.
Yeah. So,
but you're not going to see very many pro-choice Republicans at the national level
not
either.
Speaking on that issue, at least. I mean, might be talking on other issues.
Let's talk about voter apathy, because I think that's a
I don't really care about voter apathy.
Thank you, Paul.
I'm rather apathetic.
Whatever. This is an issue that faces every single party, and I think it's partly to do with the two-party system and the way that the two parties attack each other, and I think partly it has to do with the media, but the majority of it is on the voter themselves. 70% of the people in this country choose not to vote, and I think that's because we as a political class have not given them anything to vote for, and I think you're seeing with Rupert. I see people come up to Rupert all the time and say, I haven't voted in years, or I've never voted, and I'm going to vote for you because you give me something to believe in. He registered over 500 people to vote in his campaign. No libertarian has ever done that in Indiana. Never have had that kind of voter registration. That may not be, that it may be a little different than what Republicans and Democrats do, but for us, that's tremendous. Second is, you look at things like debates. The debate coverage is not on the issues of what was discussed. The debate coverage is nerd Super Bowl talk of who won and who got defeated and
who made a slip of the tongue.
Right, but that's what gets ratings. That's what gets interest, and not enough people speak up and say, no, it's not a competition. This is a debate on ideas, and we've let the candidates manage these things down into these minute sound bites. And boy, wouldn't Richard Murdoch like 3 or 4 minutes to explain the existence of God and how life is created and wrap it in the most divisive issue in time? You can't do it in a minute, apparently.
Yeah, no.
So how do we fix voter apathy? What do we as the political class, as people online who have people that follow what we say, people who help with candidates, people who talk about politics, how do you fix voter apathy?
Stop yelling at each other.
Right.
I mean,
Civil
discussion. I mean, Paul and I, we have disagreed before on Facebook and in our blogs, but yet when when I'm on his show, we always treat each other nice.
You've never called him an ignorant slut?
No.
I talk about him
At least
behind his
not out
back.
loud, but but I just think we need to stop yelling at each other. This this whole thing with Hurricane Sandy, I mean, I don't know how much better the response could have been. I know that a lot of people are upset because there are these pockets where FEMA hasn't gotten yet, but I don't think people understand just the level of devastation and the amount of people that were affected by this storm. And, you know, when you've got Andrew Cuomo, you've got Chris Christie, you've got Mayor Bloomberg, you've got Cory Booker, all of them are saying the feds have been on the phone with us. They've been saying, what do we need? They were on the phone before the storm hit. They've been on the phone with us since the storm hit. You know, when you have these local level officials praising a party leader that may not be with their party, President Obama and FEMA and his Janet Napolitano and Homeland Security, then you still have, you know, almost this. I was watching Fox News yesterday, and the Fox News commentator, I was flipping through, and the Fox News commentator was saying,
breaking
you know, well, you've got to give President Obama credit. Well, the host was almost trying to say, well, you know, of course, he was trying to qualify what the guy said. He's like, no, you have to give the president some credit here. And I think that it's almost like, well, we're on this team, you're on that team, and we can't give anybody credit for.
That's the way it is. Yeah.
It's you know, in football, if somebody makes a great hit, it's a great hit one way or another. It doesn't matter what team made the great hit. When I'm teaching play-by-play, I teach my kids this all the time. If a good team if one team makes a good play, it's a good play. It doesn't matter if it's your team or not.
Right.
So this idea that you know, it's not a bad idea if it came from the other side or what. These are the things that we don't hear in politics anymore, and I think that creates the apathy. And maybe I'm guilty of it on my blog. I hope I'm not, but I don't think so. But I hope to keep some sort of level of civility. Now there have been times where I've just gone off, but usually I warn people before I do.
I mean, I look at Chris Christie praising Barack Obama's response and his ability to communicate, and then the comparison of his convention speech. I look at it in his convention speech saying that he was a failed leader. That's meta. You know, that's over the course of his presidency. And in this one instance, he's saying he did a good job. It doesn't mean that he's contradicting himself. Right. And if you can't understand that, if you don't have the flexibility of mind to understand that there's a difference, then really just don't say anything.
And it comes from MSNBC. It comes from Fox News.
Right.
It comes from Rush Limbaugh. I mean, Rush Limbaugh, you know, absolutely went off on Chris Christie.
Right.
You know, I find myself defending Chris Christie now to some of my liberal friends.
Right.
And they're all, you know, they're surprised that I do that. I don't agree with Chris Christie on a lot of things. I respect him and I like him because I think he's one of the very few honest people in politics. If you say something that he disagrees with, he's going to tell you that, and he's going to give it a little New Jersey on top of it.
Yeah. Right.
Know? You know, I got you, New Jersey right here. He's not afraid to say that. And we need more of that in politics because those are the kind of people that I can support even if I don't agree with them. I may not vote for Chris Christie when he runs for president, if he does, but I can at least say if he's my president, wow, he said what he meant.
And I think people respect that. I don't think we give voters enough credit. They respect honesty from politicians, and the fact that Chris Christie says that Obama did a good job with the storm and with FEMA, that doesn't mean he agrees across the board, and there's not something awful with complimenting a public official who does a good job on a task. And we divide up into teams too much partisanship, bitter partisanship, and we don't work together enough.
And I would say that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have you guys on is because you guys are fair. You know, it's not about being this person's right or wrong. It's just about being fair. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Give them a little consideration. Be a human being. It's not just use everything for political gain. You know, and I think you guys do that very fairly, and you guys do something that I think is completely necessary in any party. And, you know, it irritates me when it happens in the Libertarian Party, but it needs to be done. The silent majority has to speak up. And in any case, always. Because when the silent majority is silent, the most vocal minority usually the extremists become the talking points. They become the mainstream. And I think we see this with the Tea Party now. The people who, where Andy Horning goes and speaks to a Tea Party. Now, here's a guy who, in 2007, on July 4th, calls into the radio stations and says, I'm having a protest about property taxes outside of the governor's mansion. 500 people show up. He annotates constitutions. He is Tea Party patient zero. He's been talking about the same message, which is the the Tea Party message for years and elections. He goes to the Northside Tea Party. He about a month ago, 6 people turn their chair around and have conversations while he's trying to speak.
Oh, it's just rude.
And one person, when I said something about this on Facebook, one woman said, I was there and I thought it was completely inappropriate. Well, what did you do about it? Did you go over there and say, shh? Did you say that's impolite? That's not how we behave in America? That's not how we behave in civil politics? No, you didn't. So you are part of the problem, and you are letting the minority become the perception of the majority. And I think in any party, when we see things that we don't like, you have to speak up and you have to say, no, listen, Rush Limbaugh, be quiet. Just, or turn it off or speak up. And I think you guys have done a great job of speaking up when your own parties, not just talking about what the other parties don't do right, but what's wrong in your own party as well.
The Tea Party, too, and John and I have different views on the Tea Party, but the Tea Party really started out as a populist movement and against things like corporate bailouts. And I think when they stray from that economic message, I think they get into trouble. I don't see them. I think they've been. I see a lot of similarities between the Tea Party and the Occupy movements. They're both populist movements. One's approaching from the left, one's approaching from the right. But we're all, and I write a lot about corporate welfare. We have so much corporate welfare in this city, and to me, that's not what I want my party to stand for.
No, I think we're probably closer than you think on the Tea Party. What I think has happened with the Tea Party, though, is that they've been co-opted by others. I think that people have taken up that kind of like you're talking about. Andy was kind of a pure Tea Party person, where it was the taxed enough already party. But at some point, the Glenn Becks and the other folks got involved, and now that Tea Party has become something that maybe the original people who started it would not even recognize. And I think sometimes that happens too with the Occupy movement, where it starts out as being a very peaceful kind of movement, and then the wrong element comes in, and then suddenly we've got all this craziness going on. But I think that happens sometimes, and it's hard to keep a movement kind of pure from that perspective, because you're always going to have the extreme try to pull in. But I just think that the Tea Party's time of being able to kind of pull politics one way or another, I think that's slowly closing. I think that we're starting to see kind of a snapback, and if Richard Murdoch loses here in Indiana, which I think he will, I think you'll see kind of some of that, because he was really pushed by the Tea Party.
Yeah.
One thing I think will be interesting to see if Romney loses, what happens after a loss is you start blaming each other, and
right.
And people are going to blame the Tea Party. And I'm thinking Mitt Romney is the least Tea Party candidate you could put forward. Yet the Tea Party people will probably get blamed.
Now, speaking of speaking up, you guys write pretty consistently, and you have for years, and I've tried to maintain a blog, and I did well for maybe a year.
It's tough.
I mean, how do you guys... Do you have advice for other bloggers on how to be consistent, how to get your message out there, and how do you decide what to write about? Let's start with Paul.
Well, how do I decide what to write about? I found myself, before I had my blog, writing long emails to people and writing letters to the editor and things like that. I get motivated by issues, things I see out there, and apparently there's a story in IBJ that this morning about giving away a bunch of houses and how a nonprofit turned that into the city giving away a bunch of houses and they turned it into a huge profit. That gets me motivated because that's something I feel strongly about. I'm tired of these type of giveaways of public property or in this case private property. So there are things that motivate me. You have to find out what motivates you. And for some people, it might be politics, might be sports or some other thing. But you have to find something that motivates you to write, or you're not going to do it on a consistent basis. So that's what motivates me.
Well, when I first started the blog, I didn't update daily. I was kind of like you. I'd do 2 or 3 blog posts here, and then, I'd put it off, put it aside. But I found that people were telling me, hey, I really like your blog. Yeah. I wish you'd blog more. And actually, one of the people that told me that the most often was Phil Hinkle, former state representative, and now, had his issues. But Phil, whenever I would see him, because Phil and I go back a long way.
He's technically still in.
Yeah, he's still in. Right, he's still in the Indiana House. He's been very quiet. I can't figure out why.
Yeah. God love Phil. He's actually a nice man.
He is a nice guy.
Yeah, but
okay.
But whatever happened and et cetera, he's a friend of the family. He's been a friend of the family. His wife was one of my teachers, and my mom was their Avon lady way back in the day. But anyway, he knew me before I was born because my mom was pregnant doing the Avon, so he knew me before I was born.
That's why your skin looks so great.
That's right. Yes. But he would encourage me to do it, and so I started. I think it was June 30th, maybe of 2009. Started trying to do it daily, and I did it daily for a while, and then I just decided to do it 5 days a week. So I'll write blog posts ahead of time. Sometimes if there's something that if I get on a roll, I can knock out 2 or 3 of them. It doesn't take me incredibly long to write them because I try not to make them, like Chris Worden, who used to do novels pretty much.
Right.
On his
thorough,
blog.
Atlantic.
Thorough.
It's like the Harper's Weekly type.
Exactly. I mean, and that was Chris's thing.
Or Pat Andrews, who writes
Pat
really
does,
great stuff.
Exactly. Chris and Pat both, when Chris was doing his blog, and now Pat Andrews. If you haven't seen the Had Enough Indie blog, she really goes in depth, and I find
researches stuff.
Yes.
What are some of the other blogs that you guys read daily that you think other people ought to be reading?
Well, I read Ogden on politics.
Thank you, John.
I read quite a bit. I get a lot of traffic from Paul's blog as well. I read Abdul's stuff. I think Abdul, sometimes I find Abdul entertaining because I know Abdul.
Sometimes he pushes the truth a little bit.
Well, but I know Abdul, and I know that he's never 99.5% of the stuff he writes is just to entertain, and just to, he is driven by profit a lot of times and cigar money.
I will give Ogden credit for being so polite.
So I do read Abdul. I know Paul and he have had some interesting run-ins, which I believe I defended you over. Maybe I think I did. At least I did in my brain.
I think Matt Stone over at Indy
Matt Stone
does a good job.
Yes.
And I don't know if you're necessarily a big fan of his, but Advance Indiana, Gary Welsh, Republican.
Gary writes probably more than anybody.
Yeah, and Gary Welsh is not afraid to challenge, as hopefully I'm not, challenging Republicans who don't follow Republican philosophy.
It's more Gary is not a fan of mine because of my association with Abdul than me being a fan of his. So I eventually, that's more of what it is. It's my association with Abdul has, I always try to tell people that each person's an individual, and just because you are friends with someone, it doesn't mean you're always the same way. But yeah, I think Advance Indiana, and I will say this, if you get something on Channel 13, you don't get much traffic, but if it's posted on Gary's blog, then you will get a lot of traffic.
Right.
A lot of people read it.
I think I'm not sure it's correct. I think he may have the highest readership of any of the local political blogs.
Featherstone
on politics, Josh
does a nice
is
job.
Really starting to do a good job.
He doesn't write as much as I wish he would.
Doug Mason.
Does a good
Doug
job.
Mason's good.
Mason.us.
And Sheila Kennedy.
Yep.
Sheila
from a liberal perspective, but
Yeah.
she's a phenomenal writer. Sheila Seuss Kennedy, she does a great job. But you mentioned Pat too. Pat Andrews. If you're not reading her blog, you're missing a lot. Pat's a Democrat. She ran for. She's kind of like she's kind of on the outs with the mainstream, party people. But
I should clarify. Party leadership.
party leaders.
Once
Thank
you
you.
get below
Right.
the leadership, that
Thank you.
people like
Not
you.
the
It's-
mainstream. That was the
I've-
wrong word.
I mean, I have my blog, chrisspangle.com, and I haven't written in forever, and I rarely write anything on a blog.
But you've been busy.
I found that Facebook is my blog. I mean, if you go to my Facebook page, I update it a lot. I update it daily, and that's where people are. That's where people interact. That's where they read stuff. I find people go through and read my comments,
and you have
mention it today.
Facebook stock too, right?
I have, yes, I wish.
Well,
So-
you
well,
talked.
actually, I don't wish.
No, you don't.
Yeah, thank you for catching that mainstream because that was the wrong term.
Yeah.
But with you mentioned advice earlier for bloggers. Passion, I think what you're passionate about. I think being fair, I think is key because I won't.
Independent-minded. Very important.
Yeah, right.
Right.
You can't approach things
By doing
know,
the party line every
right.
time.
So I think I probably do that more than you do, but you got to know who your readers are. I get a few hits every day. I mean, I'm not probably up in where Gary is or maybe where Paul is, but don't get discouraged. I just keep writing. Mm-hmm. I've always been a writer. I love to write, so I try to do it. And every once in a while, don't be afraid to have a little fun. Just like a couple weeks ago, I just threw out I think it was last Monday, I just threw out a completely ridiculous blog post.
You posted one of my Mordock memes.
Yeah.
But again,
John, all yours are ridiculous.
Jane, you ignorant slut.
John is fair and John is independent minded. He comes with a Democratic slant, but I know he's willing to step out of the spouting the party line and to say what is on his mind.
And I've had Democrats tell me that a lot of times it's what they're thinking.
Yeah.
So
well, let's wrap up and give libertarians their medicine. So
Okay.
let's ask, what could libertarians and the Libertarian Party do better? How, from your perspective as people who watch local politics here in central Indiana and who are members of other parties, what do you think libertarians could do better to improve? Give us some advice on how we can win more votes from you guys.
nothing. Drops mic leaves. No. I would say sometimes when I look at what you guys are saying, and I agree with a lot of it. And then there's some other candidates that I see, and they're running under the Libertarian banner. And it's like, where did this guy come from? What planet are they on? So sometimes I think that, you have your core beliefs, but sometimes candidates, and I know you're trying to recruit candidates, you're trying to get people in as much as you can. I don't have that argument with the top of your ticket at all, but I think that sometimes, on some of the other races, you wonder, wow, is that really what I want somebody carrying my party saying out here on social media? So I think that's one thing. And then sometimes, I got in a little bit of a Facebook back and forth with Andy Horning on this one. He was talking about winning the race, and my point was, what's your path? Mm-hmm. What's your path to victory? I think that was sometimes I know that, I heard the vice presidential candidate, Mr. Gray, Judge Gray, say this morning, get us our 5%. Well, is that all we're working for? Or are we trying to win this thing? And that from my perspective, I know it's difficult for you guys because you don't have the inherent advantages that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have set up for themselves. Let's be honest.
Right.
You don't have that inherent advantage.
Right.
But that would be, I guess, my other thing is, sometimes, yes, what are you doing this for? Are you in it to win it, or are you in it just to have your voice heard?
Right.
That would be my second thing.
Well, I certainly agree with what John said. One thing that I would like to see them be, the Libertarians be, I like the fact they concentrate on issues, but at the end of the day, they need to be willing to accept half the loaf rather than get none of the loaf. Today we were talking about drug legalization. I know it's been an issue discussed among the Libertarians. The fact is, you're not going to get drug legalization right away. There's going to be a process by which, for example, marijuana becomes decriminalized, or another drug, the penalties are decreased. Be willing to accept those victories. Don't insist on winning the whole battle and not be willing to compromise, because it's the same thing. We talk about Democrats and Republican compromise. I don't mean compromise in your core beliefs, but at the end of the day, if you want to move the ball forward, you need to compromise on certain issues.
And it may not seem like it from the outside, but Libertarians are actually a little more like Democrats than they are. Well, it's sort of split. I mean, we certainly have our group that wants us to be monolithic. You have to be pure. You have to say this. You have to say that. You have to go out and preach the full gospel, so to speak. You can't equivocate, because people are attracted to bold statements. But sometimes going out and saying, well, let's end all Social Security and Medicare in 2013, that's a bold statement, but sometimes, you've got to have a little finesse on it. And here in Indiana, I think one of the reasons you see success and one of the reasons you see growth, one, we've had a staff member as our executive director for 10 of the last 12 years. Makes a huge difference compared to other state parties. And we're directional libertarians more than destination libertarians, where we say, let's start piece by piece. Rupert goes out and talks about, here's what I'm going to do if I'm elected as governor on January 1st. Not, here's what we're going to do 50 years from now. There's a little bit of, a difference between that and going out and making it an infomercial for libertarians. There are people who are attracted to both, and there are people inside the party that do both. Libertarians, though, are a little more coalitional. You've got your constitutional libertarians. You've got your, how Chard Reed and James Neese are in the same party. James is a non-governmental socialist, basically, where he wants it to be mutualistic. That's his perfect society, and Chard is a strict constitutionalist. And it's sort of these 8 or 9 philosophies sort of band together to vote for libertarians, and I think there needs to be more coordination and polite dialogue within the party a lot of times on the national and local level. So is there anything you guys, before we go, because, this will be the longest podcast I think we've ever done at 53 minutes so far. So give us some closing statements. What do you want to plug? What do you want to plug? What are some things that you'd like to say? Go ahead. Let's start with Jon Easter from Indy Democrat.
This is the most important election of it all. It's like our closing statement.
Listen, if you want to win, you got to do it in the Kennedy cadence.
Right. This is the most important election.
You can say whatever you want in the Kennedy cadence, and you'll win.
Or just sound like this, too, I can obviously just do the whole thing as Bill Clinton, and there we go.
Literally get away with anything if you're Bill Clinton.
Yes, that is exactly right. What do you mean? No, I'm a amateur presidential impressionist.
Clinton is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
That's pretty good. That's
actually, yeah.
That's really good.
The big thing is that we're all in this together. We are all involved. If you're sitting here and listening to a 53-minute podcast, you are someone who is interested in politics. Mm-hmm. You're interested in the game of politics. And it is a game. At the end of the day, we go home and we're still on the same team. Just remember that. Even though we may have different views, different ways that we think about issues, and we may have very passionate feelings on those. But at the end of the day, when Jeff Cox and I can be in the same room and he thanked me for this traffic he gets on his blog and being fair to him. When we can do that, having the differing views that we have, as we did on the Civil Discourse show, that is something that needs to happen a lot more.
Right.
And it won't happen unless the people say and stand up and say, hey, stop all this bull that's going on at the national level, because it doesn't happen at the local level as much. I've been in places where I've seen Jeff Miller, who is on the city county council, and he's a Republican, but he doesn't necessarily vote all the way with his party all the time, and I know that probably annoys him. Benjamin Hunter, another person who is very coalition-minded. I think that, you have people like that locally who I would credit. I would credit a lot of the Democrats on the council as well. But we need more of that in the state and the national level. And we're going to get one-party rule probably here in Indiana at the state level. I don't think that's a good thing, but
Right.
that's the way it goes.
High five on that.
Yeah.
So, Paul, closing arguments here.
I would say the same thing if they were all Democrats too.
Right.
I don't agree with one-party rule.
One of the reasons I started a blog is because our newspapers are not what they used to be, and things don't get covered. And I think that with the new media, with the podcast, with the blog, with the internet, I call it an internet TV show, Civil Discourse Now, we're able to talk more about issues and get things out that aren't being covered. I think that kind of exposure is critical to deciding how to deal with those issues. We have too much stuff going on behind closed doors. I've complained about it in the city, things that happen, the taxpayers losing, the city giving away property to developers and things like that. We need to have more exposure what's going on, and we need to have the parties working together more. I'd like to see. Unfortunately, we have a sharply divided Democratic and Republican Party, and I don't understand why the mayor isn't looking at the fact that Democrats have a majority on the council and start working with some of them. I don't mean throwing them a bone or giving them some kind of advantage. I'm talking about actually sitting down, meeting with them on a regular basis, becoming friends with them, and understanding where they are. We need more of that in politics.
And he essentially acts like there wasn't an election a year ago.
Don't understand that.
So,
All right. Well, thank you guys for taking the time to talk to us. I expected maybe 20 minutes, and you guys have been fantastic and great to talk to. And I think we've learned a lot today. And so
he's a lawyer, I'm a teacher, so we can just talk.
Right, and I'm a politician, I guess. So check out Indy Democrat, Ogden on Politics, Civil Discourse Now this week. Had Judge Jim Gray on, local attorney Mark Small co-host that with Paul Ogden. They had a really nice roundtable. Our buddy Matt Stone was on there. So please check that out. And thank you guys for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.